All right, let's get talking about budget planning and FY 2020 guidance.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council, Chairman Lawrence, Chairman Webb, and members of the school board. I'll just say a few things to start. Dr. Noonan may want to make a few introductory comments, and then we'll turn it over to Ms. Bawa, who will walk us through some slides on the financial forecast. But I will just say, just by way of introduction, that we have been working together just to share information prior to this meeting. We've met with school staff just to have initial discussions along the lines of the information that will be presented tonight. And we had a meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee on Friday where we reviewed this information. We've made a few refinements to the presentation since then. But the goal of tonight is to share information and to provide the City Council kind of first in this sharing of information with our best projections, our best read on what the revenue picture will be for FY20. And that's information that I think we all need in terms of thinking about how we'll try to accomplish our strategic objectives in next year's budget. So we will start off with those revenue projections, and Ms. Bawa will walk us through those slides. I'll discuss some of the kind of the policy drivers that we're working with for budget development, policies adopted by the City Council that give us direction on the key objectives and strategies. And Dr. Noonan will do the same on the school for the school side. Talk both about what we're trying to accomplish, but also what we foresee will be some of the challenges for the budget. So that's kind of my brief introduction. Dr. Noonan, anything that you would want to add?
Thank you, Mr. Shields, Mr. Mayor, City Council, Chairman Webb, and school board members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here tonight. I will not say too much. I just want to start with congratulating both the city and the schools on a clean and unqualified audit. I think that's pretty great news, and certainly speaks to our fiscal responsiveness and responsibility, at least from an operating perspective. And want to also once again sort of thank you all for your continued support of Mount Daniel. As you mentioned earlier in the evening with Mayor Tarter, we're almost there. I just want to make sure everybody knows, it's nice. Congratulations are nice, but we're not quite done. The trailers and everything are being pulled out, but really excited to be down that road. So this evening, I will, as Mr. Shields indicated, sort of speak a little bit about our current state in the schools, talk a little bit about where we stand currently without having had an opportunity to speak broadly with the school board yet with respect to our budget, and then sort of what we expect will be some of our drivers budget-wise for the school year, but for the coming school year. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
There should be enough copies of this presentation for those who want to see it in hard copy. There should be, I think I printed out plenty of copies. Okay.
All right, who's next?
Ms. Bawa.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor Tarter, Chairman Webb, members of the school board and City Council. Good evening. So we start kickoff of our fiscal year 2020 budget with preliminary financial forecast, which we'll discuss along with capital funding plan, budget cost drivers on the city side, and a budget calendar with a summary and key issues, followed by a presentation by the school staff. I'll start with a brief overview of the national and the regional economy that leads into our projections for next year. The U.S. economy continues to do well. September 2018 gross domestic product growth rate is 3.5%, and the administration's target, annualized target, is of 3%. It's expected that it would be met, and it would be one of the better performances of the decade. However, there are various economic forecasts out there from number of them, and National League of Cities, Virginia Government Finance Officers Association, and the nearest one being the Stephen Fuller Institute in Washington, D.C., that have their forecasts include a slow economic growth in 2019, the latter part of it, which is attributable to slowing federal spending, which came in as a result of the diminishing impact of the 2017 tax cuts and the Jobs Act that was passed. And secondly, from slowing international trade with the negative effects of new tariffs and the strong dollar. Steve Fuller Institute reports a slowdown in Washington regional economy starting in second half of 2019, which is the fiscal year 2020. Their third quarter performances of the region's coincident index and leading index. So coincident index is represents the current state of the metropolitan area economy. And on a monthly, over the year basis, it shows an increase of 2.1%. However, the September is the third month in a row where it's seeing a decline, July, August, and September. It's, and in July from like 0.37% in September, 0.1% in August, and 0.5% in July, total decline. And this index has seen a decrease of 5 times in the last 9 months. It's reporting for the calendar year 2019. The regional leading index is designed to forecast the performance of the metropolitan area economy 6 to 8 months in advance, and which is showing a slowdown, a slight slowdown, 0.01% in 0.1% in September of 2018 over September of 2017, a year-over-year decline. This is made up of 4 components, 3 of which are trending downwards. 23.5% increase in initial claims for unemployment insurance in the region, a decrease of 5.8% in residential building permits in September, and durable goods retail sales decreased by 1.8% between 2017 and 2018 September months. The fourth component, however, being consumer expectations, which were higher in September 2018 over last year by 13.4%, but declined from their peak value, which was in August. So we are seeing mixed results, and I'd also like to highlight that the Consumer Price Index, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for all urban consumers for Washington, Arlington, and Alexandria region increased 0.4% from July to September of this year, and an overall increase of 2% over the last 12 months, September of last year, net of the food, less food and energy indexes. And in addition to that, there is modest assessed valuation growth nationally and regionally. This is coming from various economic forecasts that have been held and indications from regions. And we'll have a slide that will show us where our neighboring jurisdictions are going with their what their growth rates are for next year. Okay, great. So I'll start with fiscal year 19. That's the current fiscal year, the approved general fund revenue budget of $92.5 million. The pie chart in front of you shows that Falls Church is heavy on real estate taxes, over 60% collectively between commercial and residential. We rely heavily on those. And the remaining indicators like business license, meals tax, sales tax, sorry. Oh, it won't work on the TV. Okay, so personal property tax, sales tax, meals tax, and business license. Those are some of the other key leading indicators for our for us of the economic situations that impact us. And we have a few slides that'll discuss where we are headed with that. For fiscal year 2020, we are forecasting an overall revenue growth of 2%, with real estate values growing by roughly 2.4% collectively for residential and commercial properties. A 2% growth equates to roughly $1.7 million, given our budget. Delving a little into the details of the assessed values in Falls Church, along with a comparison of the region. We are in line with the 2 to 2.5% growth in real estate valuations in the nearby jurisdictions. Falls Church, the residential market is still strong at 2.75%, including roughly 32 million, which is 0.75% in new construction. The commercial sector is lagging with lack of commercial construction at 1%. For an overall AV growth of 2.4% and a total revenue growth of 2%. Arlington is estimated at 2.5%, with a breakdown of 2.5% for residential and 2% for commercial, and an overall revenue growth of 1.5%. Fairfax assessed valuation is also at 2.2% overall, with the commercial slightly better off than residential. Alexandria is between the range of 2 to 3%. We haven't been able to obtain exact numbers, but we're in the process. For Falls Church, the break between residential and commercial is roughly 70-30, and residential include condominiums, and commercial includes the apartments.
Ms. Bawa, can I stop? Do we understand why Fairfax is the outlier with their total revenue growth higher than their AV growth?
Yes, so they are expecting some additional state aid as well as additional federal money funding. In state funding, they're expecting 18 million more for their schools, which skews their maths on the favorable side on their overall total revenue growth.
And I'm guessing us in Arlington don't benefit from that.
It's probably driven by, and they can probably tell what are the factors that their aids are driven by, but
Scale is about 1% of their budget.
Correct, and that funding for schools is not in their total revenue for the county itself. The schools is expecting that revenue in Fairfax, but it's not in the county's overall revenue growth.
Oh,
Then why does it contribute to the 2.9%?
so that's the disconnect.
Yeah, I don't believe it does contribute to the 2.9%. They definitely are showing that overall revenue, but that revenue should go directly to the schools.
So
Right,
this
that-
is sales tax receipts that are associated with school-age population?
So when you look at why Fairfax's overall state aid is growing, right, it's probably significantly driven by their increased enrollment overall, right? They're also largely impacted by the compensation dollars included in the state budget for next year. So that would be contributing to that significant increase for schools in Fairfax, right? They have a much lower LCI or local composite index than here, so they do benefit more greatly than we do in terms of the effect of state aid impacting the school's budget.
So that doesn't explain why why they are higher than the rest of us. So I think we'll need to.
The next slide gives historical real property trends. A total assessed value of real estate is approximately 4.1 billion as of January 2018. Both residential and commercial markets have seen a growth over the past 9 years, starting from 2010. So next year will be the 10th year. This year is 2019 is the 10th year. The chart shows still 2018. In 2009 and 10, there was roughly a 10% decline in AV, and commercial remains roughly 30% of the total AV over the last 10 years, hovering around somewhere between 29 to 31%, 31 in 2008 and 29% in 2018. This slide provides historical real estate tax rate increases over the last 10-year window, an increase of 9.2% over the last 10 years, with fiscal year 18 and 19 increases for capital projects. Next, we'll look at a few key indicators for the revenue projections. after the assessed valuation. This one is personal property tax. In fiscal year 19, we're projected to come at the current budget fiscal year. We're projected to come at 97% of the budget at 6.1 million projection against a 6.3 budget target that we set. In fiscal year 18, over 17 saw a 9 to 10%. Both years saw a 9 to 10% increase. However, an increase in the valuation of the vehicles for this year has been offset by the depreciation and other decreases in the business property, the tangible valuation. And for that reason, we are projecting no growth in fiscal year 2020 for this category. So you see that the dotted line is the projection for 2019, and it's below the blue target. That's the budget for 2019. That would mean roughly a 2.5% increase over the projected increase to even be flat for next year. Sales tax growth is projected at 3% increase for fiscal year 2020. There has been an average growth of roughly 2 to 3% annually, except for 2017, where you'll see a more steep increase. Probably attributable to Harris Teeter and the other big construction that was there that year. Meals tax, 2020 proposed increase is of 8% over fiscal year 19 budget. The second line in that box, the fiscal year 19 budget is actually with the fiscal year 18 actuals, we've already met the fiscal year 19 budget. So for that reason, we are proposing projecting a 10-year average for fiscal year 19, and on top of that, a 6% increase. So projecting a total 8% increase in fiscal year 20 over the fiscal year 19 budget. Business license tax is one of the hardest to forecast, as we don't get this data till March 1st, and it gets more clear to us in the third quarter. However, in fiscal year 19, we need to realize a 6.7% growth over the fiscal year 18 actuals to meet the budget target, which is a pretty aggressive target for us. The last few years, if you see 16, 17, have grown well. However, it's tapering due to lack of large constructions in last year and this year. So fiscal year 19 are lagging for now. And we do recognize that Founders Row and a couple other projects would be coming on board, and hopefully if we do not meet the current year's budget target for this category, remaining flat would help leave room for growth in that category for next year.
So, but for the major new construction developments, BPOL would otherwise be flat. Is that correct? Or even slightly decline? Thank you.
Slide 13 provides for recent history of operating expenditure growths. I'd like to highlight the general government 3-year, 5-year, 7-year, 10-year, but 3-year and 10-year averages just as for reference. In comparison with organic revenue growth of 3.7% in 3-year average and 1.3% in 10-year average. This goes to say that with 1.3% increase in average 3-year increase, it is for the general government budget to accommodate for the services and the increased projects that are going. The 5 and 7 years, the 7-year is a little higher number to make up for, I think, when the fiscal year 9 and 10 saw the depressed values. We had accelerated numbers in the immediate years after that to make up for those losses. So those averages tend to be higher.
Can I just make a note on that? This is a pretty remarkable chart that for the 10-year period looking back, we've averaged 1.3% revenue growth coming from the economy itself. And when we were looking at the recession, when we were working through the recession at that time, we talked about the fact that this was a deeper recession. This was what people were calling a secular economic event as opposed to just a cyclical economic event, that it would have a long-term impact on the ability of the economy to rebound, on consumer confidence, and on a whole host of things. I don't think there's any other 10-year period in the city's history where the economy gave us 1.3% revenue growth per year. We could go back on the data and check, but my gut instincts are that there has been no period in the 60-plus year history of the city where that's been the case. Now, we have had more positive years in more recent times. We've had an average of 3.7% organic revenue growth in the past 3 years. But typically with a recession, you get a really strong rebound. And nationally, that didn't happen or hadn't happened to date. And regionally, that certainly didn't happen because after the recession, we had sequestration really put a damper on the regional economy. So I think that's worth thinking about in terms of when we think about sort of long-term trends. We're saying this is the new normal, and it has been the new normal. It has worked out that way, and it's been very tough for financial managers across the country and in our region.
May I ask, so that 1.3% number has occurred over the last 10 years in spite of the fact that over the last 15 years we have been more aggressively pursuing mixed-use economic development and economic development of all kinds. Had we not done that, it's possible that we would be in a negative position over 10 years.
I think almost certainly so. We had a 25% reduction in commercial assessed value during the recession and a 10% reduction in residential assessed value during that period of time. That helps put some of that in context.
But to your point about the 3, 5, and 7 numbers, that 1.3% is going to get washed out as we move away from the Great Recession, and so those numbers are going to look better. I mean, knock on wood, depending on what happens in the future. So we're going to some extent, that 1.3 is an artifact of the recession.
But I guess I would still say it does still inform kind of our financial condition today. So there's been a lot of really positive things that happen. I don't want this just to be doom and gloom. I think there's been a lot of really good financial planning and a lot of good financial management. It's been a collective effort. But I think that is an unusual number in the history of the city.
We'll take a look at the city's capital improvement program funding plan before I turn it over to Mr. Shields for the budget cost drivers. The first bond issuance was for the full CIP that was adopted by council in July of 2017. The first bond issuance with the George Mason High School coming on board in the CIP was done in May of this year, which included the City Hall, the fire station land acquisitions, and a portion of the library and a portion of the school, the George Mason High School. The second bond issuance is anticipated in May of 2019 for approximately $70 million to fund the rest of the library and a major portion of the high school project construction, as well as some general government CIP projects. Increased new debt service is is projected to start in 2020 based on all the modules that were provided when we looked at the full CIP. And we'll go through this in the next slide. There is no tax rate increase required to fund the capital improvement plan. All the strategic actions have been taken already by council, and we'll review that closely. And funding has been set aside in the capital plan to fund the full CIP. Pardon me for this busy chart, but we'll go through this. So As I mentioned, no tax increase required for capital funding for the projects that we reviewed till 2024 or 25 and all the way with the debt service and 30-year window. The first line in this chart, so this chart actually shows fiscal year 19 as it starts, it remains right now, along with a projection of the next 5 years with that. Looking at the capital funding, the debt service is the starting point for all, and this is the new debt service. The current debt service is in the range of $6+ million for the current debt that the city had for capital projects. So this is based on the full CIP that was adopted. This is new debt service that's being added to the plan, bringing it over the, like for fiscal year 2020, we're expecting the debt service to grow to roughly 12 million with the current 6.7 or 8 million that we have. In the next two lines shows all the measures that have been adopted and put in place in fiscal year 18 as well as 19 budgets. The real estate impact, that total savings for capital was 6.5 cents, 1.5 cents increase in fiscal year 18 budget, and 5 cents increase funding set aside for in the fiscal year 19 budget, with 3 cents in operating savings for capital projects and 2 cents increase that was adopted by council. So that's the 5 cents in fiscal year 19 and 1.5 cents in 18. The next line shows the return on investment on pensions, which is roughly 1.5 cents that was talked about based on the water proceeds that were set in the pension fund. And the next line shows the use, addition to in 2019, we added 1.2 million to the capital reserve. And in the future years, we are using capital reserves to fund our debt service, resulting in no net required contribution on the tax increment for the capital projects. The city entered into an interim agreement for the West Falls Church project, which was designed to fund the debt service for this new school. So the land sale proceeds in this chart are modeled based on that agreement: 6.5 million in fiscal year 19, and 7 million in fiscal year 21, starting annually for 4 years. This results in a capital balance in the last line. If the projects stay on school, this is predicated on a condition if the projects stay on schedule. However, when we modeled stress testing for the project, it can fund up to 2 years of delay in that time schedule, and the amount of the capital reserve would go below the policy requirement as of today. However, we cannot withstand any other delays in that project more than that.
Just a couple questions, just for clarity. Land sale proceeds means ground lease proceeds, is that right? Okay, just right, just so there's clarity there. And are those numbers based on option A or option B?
We haven't gotten to the $10 million payment for phase 2, so that's in the out years.
Okay.
This is really getting us through this 5-year planning horizon, which really is actually our biggest stress for recovering our debt service. It gets easier after that. So in our stress testing, as Ms. Bawa said, we can, with the reserves at this level after that payment, the first payment in May 2019, our reserves are in a condition to be able to tolerate a 2-year delay because of market reasons or for whatever case may be. And these numbers kind of make that very clear. Our debt service is going to go up to $9.8 million a year. We'll have $15 million in reserves, so we can cover roughly 2 years of delay.
Well, I would just say, Mr. Seals, to you and your team, this is pretty impressive, so I tip my hat that you've been able to work this out this way, because it's quite remarkable that you can carry this through without big tax rate increases, so good job.
Yes, Vice Mayor?
I just want to point out for the good of everyone here who's relatively new at the table, the ROI on the pension, the 1.5 cents. So I just want to make sure. I feel like every year we need to say this and we need to commemorate it. Back in 2013 and 2014, when the water sale occurred, the city got a large infusion of cash, $20 million plus. At the time, there were a lot of different faces at the table, but the plan was, and it was laid out over a whole year, and it took me a whole year to fully understand it and to be comfortable voting for it, is that we invested $11 million of the water sale money in paying off the city's pension obligations, as if we had prepaid the mortgage on our house so we didn't have the monthly mortgage obligation. And because of that, we have a $640,000 every year that we are not paying out in operating expenses that we're recapturing in capital. So at the time, it seemed like a good idea, but my big fear when we did it is that there would be different faces around the table and nobody would understand what that was. And the way it was modeled was out over eternity, right? You weren't even here when we did it. We modeled it out over many years to show that it was a very good investment for the city. It just didn't make a lot of sense at the time as we worked it out. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that is a very good investment that the city has made by paying off those pension obligations. Did I explain that well?
I did. I would make just one tweak to it. At the end of the day, it was a $9.2 million investment in the pension fund. And so the $640,000 is predicated on a 7% annual return in perpetuity. There were some changes at the end, and the council elected to have some money that would go for direct investments, immediate investments in the community, which included the turf and the track renovation, along with downtown reinvestments. But then the rest of the $20 million is what seeded this, the capital reserves, which has a current balance of $10 million today. Which is helping make the whole financial plan for the high school and the entire CIP possible. But that pension return, we will try to make sure that that's memorialized always, that it's memorialized in the pension documents, and that the actuaries know how to treat it the way that the council intended.
Ms. Hartney, then Mr. Lieutenant.
Thanks. So this plan is predicated on both the land proceeds, land transaction proceeds happening on this schedule, as well as debt service being as laid out. And I know when we did the stress test, sounds like we had 2 years of flexibility to withstand 2 years of delay. Did we stress test what if debt service goes up? So as our capital projects continue, did we, I guess, make any guesses of how debt service might increase if projects come in above budget?
Yes, when we did the modeling for the full CIP, we did gradual increased interest rates for the 3 tranches of the bond issuances from 3.5% to 5% increments. And the major portion of that issuance is between 4.5% to 5%. Any quarter basis point increases would lead to additional debt service, and we have had our financial advisors look into that as well as the modeling that we did. Are you looking for exact timing or dollar
I'm just
amounts?
curious. It sounds like interest rates are going up, so we pretty much should expect that the next 2 tranches will be higher than what we paid last year, right? But I'm just curious whether we have some sort of tolerance of, hey, we can accept this much more in debt service and still be in this plan that we've laid out.
And we kind of need to be around those figures that we assumed in our model, somewhere around the 5% rate.
So if projects come in above budget, then these debt service numbers will change, and therefore this plan may not look the same, is what you're saying. Okay,
Right.
Thank you.
Mr.
And
Lick,
if you recall, we have a 5-cent increase for the capital projects and a decrease of 2 cents a few years down. I think it was fiscal year 22. So it was 5, 3, 2, and then 1, going back to, I think, fiscal year 2029. So that was the other room for it should there have been any increase in debt service. So that would have been the additional room buffer.
Mr. Lichtenhouse, do you have a question?
Ms. Bowell, just going back and looking at the non-real estate tax graphs that you had there. I think it makes up about 39% of the total tax revenue. And I was just looking at the charts individually, and it seems that most of those budget versus actuals we've been under, aside from a blip in 2015 where it seems like somebody was really able to look into the magic 8 ball. We're not sandbagging, are we? I mean, I look at personal property tax and how you expect for that to flatten, and just wonder, you know, as we get into the time frame of quarreling over a few $100,000, do we feel good about the methodology on these non-real estate tax?
Yes.
Better than in the past? Because it seems to be some significant gaps between budget and actual.
Yeah,
I know
and
that predates you, so.
I completely understand your question, especially for the personal property tax. This was one of the harder ones as far as predictions go, because the last 2 years we've seen a growth of 9% plus.
It's because Mr. Z stopped buying cars.
But I mean, at the same time, it's not easy to overlook what's happening in the current fiscal year. We're at 95% collection right now, with the supplementals coming at the rates that we realized last year. We are projecting that we'll meet our target by 97%. Not having seen any, extra influx of business tangibles, like Harris Teeter was the last one, and then they start seeing depreciation after that. It's very difficult to predict those kind of increases for next year.
Okay. I know it is difficult. I mean, your forward-looking prognosticating is difficult in these types of collections.
We will, and with that, I'd like to say that we will continue to monitor these indicators. We will have better results with the second quarter, and we will include those. We bring the second quarter results to you in February, and based on that, we may have another month. Based on that, we'll have the city manager's budget proposal in March.
I'm hoping it looks a little bit better.
We will continue to monitor these.
I mean, I think we are facing some pretty significant economic headwinds from a macro perspective, so I'm not exactly optimistic about the latter part of 19 and 2020, but hopefully it gives us a little bit better indication as to direction for this budgeting process. And then finally, I had a question in our budget and finance meeting related to the newly entitled properties at Founders Row and Broad in Washington, about the assessed values there, going from unentitled to entitled now that they have special exception. I know there were some questions that were going to be asked in terms of how that might have affected the assessment on those properties, even though they're still land. Do we know the answer to that?
Well, there is a small increase in value when you get an entitlement like that. It doesn't really move the needle when you think about it for the whole city. And particularly Founders Row, that entitlement actually was about 3 years ago, and so that's already been factored in. Washington and Broad will have a small factor, but it's
minimal.
It's one parcel, and the number's not significant enough to really move the needle citywide.
All right. Thanks.
All right, any other questions? Mr. Castillo?
Just asking for a friend, could you explain, Mr. Shields, entitlement and non-entitlement?
So entitlement is when the city council has rezoned a property so that it can support a higher density, and that means the land is now more valuable, and I think that's what we're referring to.
Anything else? Ms.
So
Bauer?
with that, I pass on to Mr. Shields for rest of the discussion on the budget cost drivers and
Okay.
the schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bawa. If you could just advance, I've only got, I think, 3 slides or maybe 4. So the first one is just what I'd like to talk about is some of our strategic objectives, some of the things that we'll be working with the council on for next year's budget. But first, just a few numbers that we either know now or we anticipate will be part of our budget development. One, health insurance. That is not known yet. If we are assuming a 10% increase in premiums, that would be a $200,000 charge that we would need to accommodate in the budget. Compensation, I want to speak more about this in just a moment, about what compensation is helping us accomplish, but ultimately what we're needing to do is cultivate a high-performing workforce that can handle really complex projects and programs that the city is administering today. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Retirement, I think, is going to be, again this year, a good news area. We don't think there'll be any increase in the city's cost to retirement. I think there'll be either be flat or a slight decrease based on the actuarial studies that we've gotten. Those will be finalized in January. However, that has an impact on the school budget as well for all of the support staff in the school division that are in the city's pension plan. WMATA has indicated a preliminary budget impact on the City of Falls Church of $400,000. And this number is a bit surprising to us because we had anticipated that this fiscal year was actually going to be a bit of a break from WMATA in terms of the series of increases that we've experienced in the last 3 years. And so we've got a lot of work to do, I think, regionally with our transit authority on this number, but this would be a penny on the tax rate just to cover that interjurisdictional agreement, or the equivalent of that, and that's a big struggle. One thing just to let council be aware of, Fire Station 6, we've been notified by Arlington County that they've changed their staffing levels there, and we need to review that in terms of our agreement with Arlington County. But they have signaled to us there could be some cost increases on that, and we need to work that issue through. Ultimately, that's governed by an agreement that the City Council has adopted with the Arlington County Board on staffing levels at the Station 6. The Community Services Board funding. With the Medicaid expansion adopted by the General Assembly last year, money is going directly to beneficiaries, and the state paying for a portion of that reduced funding for local community services boards for mental health services. And so that may have some impacts. The county is concerned that it will have impacts. The state says, don't worry, all the money is going to come to you through the Medicaid beneficiaries. There's a disagreement over that, and the county is working through those numbers, but that could end up being an issue that translate into our required contribution to Fairfax County for these services. So those are a couple of things. Some of them we don't have numbers on, but they will be issues that we're going to be working through. More broadly, though, next slide, sort of the big things we're working on. The City Council has laid out strategic objectives through the comprehensive plan and other planning documents. But last year the city updated Chapter 1 vision, but in recent years has also updated our transportation plan, mobility for all modes, parks for people, and adopted area plans for economic development. All of those have strategic objectives in it, either at the program level or at the CIP level. And the council's also adopted its 2-year work plan to prioritize those projects. So we want to move those things forward within an albeit constrained budget environment. As the council knows, the housing, the environmental sustainability chapter is under development right now. That is an ambitious chapter. There will be a lot of things that we'll try to accomplish in that realm, some of which will be funded hopefully in partnerships with the private sector. But some of those are going to need to be supported locally. Affordable housing is a big area in the council's work plan. We'll be updating our overall strategies and approaches on housing affordability in the city. And the council got a presentation on the demographics chapter. That probably won't have programs associated with it, but we will want to hold that into our long-term planning documents so that the city is evolving as our demographics evolve. Next slide. The council's 2-year budget plan really focused on 5 main areas of strategic objectives: increasing the vibrancy of our commercial districts, and that has in small ways like the tree lighting, improving parking improving placemaking. These are all initiatives that we're trying to work forward, sometimes in partnership with the EDA, the Chamber of Commerce, and our local businesses. That's an important area of work. Economic development, more largely, and we've just updated the city's fiscal impact model, but we have a whole host of initiatives in that area to help pay for a growing city. Housing affordability, which I just mentioned, a lot of that historically has been done in partnership with the private sector through the rezoning process, but the City Council has also asked us to look at things that the city can do more affirmatively to help move the needle on housing affordability. So we'll be trying to present options for that in the budget as well. Core government services across the board, everything from neighborhood traffic calming, neighborhood preservation, communication, all of these areas fall in that, and we will bring those initiatives forward in budget as well. And then lastly, major capital projects. And these are big, complex projects that we're trying to manage in the city. They have big infrastructure implications. They have contract management implications. We need really top-notch people with experience, with the appropriate training to see those projects delivered successfully. And that brings me to really our kind of, I think, a key thing for us to be thinking about as we're working through the budget. The level of complexity that we need here on staff to accomplish these objectives. We're trying to retain excellent staff and also recruit excellent staff in a highly competitive environment. We've lost some really exceptional people in the past year in our IT services, and our GIS manager, our grants manager. We've lost 2 engineers in the last month who are managing really key projects in stormwater to try to address flooding that we've been experiencing over a really wet summer, managing the City Hall project. So we recognize that it's a tight labor market, and we've got to come up with all of the strategies to fill these vacancies and also keep our top-notch people. And a lot of that, I think, is just pure management responsibility of having a really an organization that rewards success and gives our excellent staff the space and the need and meet all of their needs so that they can be successful. But we've certainly experienced some challenges in that area in the past year. One that, I think anybody can think of: IT, engineering, contract management, GIS. Those are things that you can just immediately understand. Those are competitive fields. But in all of our areas, we're finding it very difficult to recruit and retain staff. Police officers is just as one example. With all of the background checks that are required and a lot of the sort of the national dialogue that's happening about law enforcement and public safety in the country, it is extremely challenging to get good police officers. And all of our competing jurisdictions are offering money to help make that happen. That's the world that we live in, and that we need to respond to. So those are some of the things that we'll be trying to grapple with when we put our budget recommendations together. And later in today's meeting, we'll be looking for council's direction and guidance as we put that budget together. So then I'll close by just noting our schedule. We do have scheduled council action on December 10th for budget guidance. That's guidance would be for the city manager and for the school division in terms of council's overall views in terms of budget guidance. The superintendent will present the budget on January 8th. These are just some key milestones. There are a lot of other things that will be in between these gaps. On February 4th, the CIP will be presented to the Planning Commission. On February 19th, the school board will adopt its budget recommendation and request to the City Council. On March 11th, which is the second Monday in March, is when I will present a consolidated budget, incorporating the school board's budget request and the work of all of our department directors and my recommendations. And we'll have a whole series of public hearings and town hall meetings. And on April 22nd is the scheduled. Of course, the budget goes into effect on July 1st. So that's a quick overview, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have some questions for Mr. Shields? I think we do. Ms. Hardy?
On slide 19, when we talk about pay, so just I guess, a preview of the request I'm going to make is anytime we talk about pay, and it's similar to when we've talked about it for teachers, on the city side, I'd love to benchmark what our pay looks like versus other jurisdictions, especially if we think we're losing good people to our neighbors. And so kind of a preview of my request when we look at the budget in a few months is how our pay looks versus our neighbors. I know Arlington's made a concerted effort, especially on public safety. I think it's been a highlight of their budget the past 2 years, actually significantly increased their police pay. So I'm sure that's tough for us to compete with.
All right. Other questions for Mr. Shields? Anyone else have anything? All right.
Sorry.
Okay, Mr. Duncan.
I thought somebody was going in front of me. Maybe this goes back to Ms. Bawa's slides, but the chart on page 13, history of operating expenditure growth. Can we show the city's population? We've got seat enrollment growth. Does the census give us information detailed enough to do 3, 5, 7, and 10-year numbers for how much the city's population has changed in those times?
I think there's the annual update, so I think we can.
Okay. I mean, obviously, it's inclusive to some degree of seat enrollment, but it does not capture non-school children who come in. I'd just be curious to see what that number is. And the chart on page 8, historical real estate tax rates. So my understanding of this is you said it's 9.2% increase over the past 10 years in just the rate. To help people understand, or to assure people that we understand that their tax responsibilities have changed, is there a chart that shows factors in assessment growth over that period of time, so that, you know, your average house in 2010 was generating a tax bill of X, and that same average house 9 years later is generating a tax bill of Y, so that the public understands that we understand that it's not just that their taxes have changed to the tune of 9.2%, but rather their taxes have changed as a reflection of their assessment, which I assume in that period of time has gone steadily up. Well, there were a couple of years, I guess, at the very early part where maybe there was a drop.
Yeah, there were some years of dropped
Immediately after the
median
recession.
tax bills for homeowners in the city. In the budget presentation, we always show that slide of the change to the median homeowner's tax bill over time, but we didn't add that to this presentation, but we can send that to council.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Anyone else have anything for Mr. Shields? Any other questions? All right, Dr. Noonan, I think you're up.
Great, thank you very much. Let's see if I can get that clicker from you, Cindy. Thanks for pulling us up. Yeah. Well, first of all, again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here tonight and just share a little bit of information about our schools and about where we are as we sort of begin the FY 2020 budget right alongside of you. So I want to start with also thanking our board for being here tonight. They've been stalwarts for the school system and very much appreciated for their support. We begin each year with the triennial plan, and I won't dig into this eye test here.
I just look at
Mayor
the print
Tarter,
size
you,
up there.
you having a hard time seeing it, right?
Yeah.
But I did put it up there only just to show you that there are some hyperlinks in this presentation as well. So if you ever wanted to go in and really dig into sort of what our strategic plan is from 2018 to 2020, you'd be able to see that. And each year we update that, and it's really focused on a number of different priorities of the school system, beginning with the student-centered teaching and learning, looking at excellent staff, making sure that we have optimal facilities, making sure that we are very strong fiscal managers, as well as engaging in community engagement. And those are the 5 big areas that we focus on that we've shared, I think, with the council before at our sort of visioning meeting that we had, or visioning dinner that we had not too long ago. Where we also had a chance to talk about our what we effectively call, or affectionately call, the placemat. And here this placemat begins to really operationalize the work that we're doing in the school system. So our top level work this year are really deploying those best practices in teaching and learning, finding ways to close the achievement gap with an emphasis on our students who learn differently than the traditional population, and then really operating to ensure that we are making sure that we operate with effectiveness and efficiency across our system. And then below that top line are some of the more operational ways that we're working in each of our schools. So if ever at a glance, the city council or the school board or the city residents were interested in seeing what we were doing sort of in this short 3-year term, this really begins to describe that. And I think that we are, as a consequence of our outstanding faculty, our outstanding staff, our great students, our great parents, really making some inroads on our placemat. So the first student achievement slide that I wanted to share comes straight from the Virginia Department of Education. There's a new school quality index that has been put out, and this is our profile on that school quality index. And here you'll see lots of good news. You'll see not just that we're 100% fully accredited, but you'll see our reading proficiency, our math proficiency, science proficiency. Here you'll see also our social studies, our enrollment, our per pupil spending, and I'll go into each of these a little bit more in the coming slides, and then our overall attendance rate. And green and blue are good. Those are good colors to have. So when you get onto that school quality index profile, I would really encourage you to do that at some point if you have a minute, because it gives a really nice snapshot of how we're doing as a school division. And we continue to be among the highest performing school divisions in the state of Virginia. And here are just a couple of snapshot pictures of where we are with respect to the state. So the far right column is the state passing average, and the second to the far right is last year's data around SOL. So you see in reading we're at 92%, writing 92%, 87% in mathematics, 95% in history, social studies and social sciences, and 90% in science. So in comparison to the rest of the state, we are continuing to knock it out of the park. What's interesting as you get into these higher pass rates of 90 plus, it's a little bit hard to move the needle one way or another. It's easy to move the needle south. It's a little harder to move the needle north because we have a very small population of students really that we're working with. So if you think about our overall student population of about 2,600 students, 2 or 3 students really make a significant difference in what our data looks like. And I think that that'll be important as I share with you some of the data around some of our students coming in just a second. So just if you look at the Washington Area Boards of Education or the WABE guide for comparison, I just put this up here, and again, you won't be able to see it very well, but one of the things that I did want to point out is this is the graduation cohort rate across the Washington area, and Falls Church City Public Schools is at 98.5%. And our dropout rate for last year was 1%, and I would argue that it's less than 1% because we actually know who the student was and we know where he went. So, so he did not drop out. He actually moved to another spot. So we continue to have just an outstanding performance across the board in our schools, and something that I think all of us can be really proud of when it comes to community building and supporting the future of the City of Falls Church. I want to take just a second, again, to thank the community. This time last year, we were celebrating the passage of a bond referendum for $120 million. And tonight, Mr. Shields and Ms. Bawa in their presentation were talking about how through the development on the 10-acre site, we'll be able to fund a portion of that $120 million bond, and it's very exciting, the synergy of the two projects. We've come a long way in the last year, and as you all know, we are into design development with our design build team, really refining and honing that plan, and still are on track to break ground in June of this year. And again, we wouldn't be able to do it without your support as a city council and the support of the school board and certainly the community as we get out there. And we recognize that this is a major ticket item for us here in the city of Falls Church, and there's no doubt that that $120 million bond has an impact, as was indicated by the presentation just prior to us. I would like to clarify for anyone who might be watching at home that is unclear, the GM project is a capital project, and really what I want to talk about tonight is a little bit more around operations and how we operate. So thinking about operations, our 2019 budget overview, just to give you a sense of kind of what it takes for us to operate. Currently, the way that our budget is developed is we are very reliant on the general government and city council for our funding. In fact, 83% of our entire school budget comes from this body, and we are appreciative of that. We have about 1% of our budget comes from the federal government. About 13% comes from the state, and I know what was mentioned earlier was our local composite index. Our local composite index here in the city of Falls Church is the highest it can be. We are at what's considered a 0.8, so for every dollar that would potentially come back to Falls Church, 80 cents is taken off, and then we would receive 20 cents of that dollar. But we actually receive less than that in the grand scheme of things because of the way state funding flows. So 13% of our overall state budget, overall budget comes from the state, and then we have about 2% from fees and other revenues. On the expenditure side of the house, perhaps the most important takeaway for you as the council and for our viewers at home is that 86% of our budget is people. It's very different than most organizations, not just in the city, but across the country. We are heavy with people. So if you think about our teachers and our staff that are in those buildings, about 13% of our budget goes into logistics, and about 1% are transfers and reserves. So when we think about how we build our budget, we have to build our budget around people in the schools. Some of the enrollment projection information that I want to share with you is first, where do these projections come from? And I think most everybody is familiar with the Cooper Center at the University of Virginia. And that Cooper Center has been and continues to be the gold standard in Virginia for making predictions around enrollment. They are the group that is also used to allocate state tax. So they're not just looked at by schools, but they're also looked at by the state. There are a number of inputs that the Cooper Center takes into account that include birth data and fall membership accounts. And those birth data come from the Virginia Center for Health Statistics. They are reported by county and city, and future birth counts are projected based on the division's current age, specific fertility rates, probably way more than you care about, but very interesting, the data that goes into this. They also take into account historical and current fall membership accounts, and those are obtained from the schools in the fall. And we have given our information to the Cooper Center, and they have taken that into account as they look at our projection for the 2020 year as well as future projections. So that leads us to this next slide that gives you some information about where we're headed projection-wise. So if you look at the top 6 or so years, 2018-19 all the way down to 23-24, you'll see that in 2018-19 our projected enrollment was 2574, and in 23-24 we're projected to be at 2728. We are currently in that next bar down, the next bar down is our projections for the 2020 school year. So that is next year. Weldon Cooper has come in and is projecting us at 2699. So of an overall population growth comparative to this year of 54 more students. So in the past we've been asked, what is the average bump in enrollment typically from year over year? And we've said that it's between 54 and 70 students, or 50 and 70 students. I didn't say 54, somewhere between 50 and 70. And this year, we are looking at a projection that is sort of on the lower end of student growth. So next year, we are projected at 2699. So in terms of historical accuracy, I put this up here just for your visual, first of all, that those trend lines certainly tend to track very closely together. There are corrections within those trend lines that happen. So you'll see a correction between the 14 and 17 school year. But if you look at it in relation to 100% accuracy, dating back to 2007, we were at 100%, 0.3% accuracy. And then last year, in the FY19 year, we were at 96.5% accuracy. The year before, 97.8% accuracy. So when we have that kind of fluctuation, there is some enrollment shift. So we are down this year from what we anticipated we were going to have, but we expect, not unlike in past years, that these numbers will fluctuate and there will be a correction, much like there was again between 14 and 16 and again between 16 and 18. So those numbers tend to cross every couple of years. From a student services perspective, and I think that this is interesting when we think about the extraordinary staff that we have in the City of Falls Church schools, we have a growing population of unique learners that learn differently than many of us in this room may have. So when we look at our language instruction education program, or our LEAP program, which was formerly known as the ESOL program, working with English language learners, in the 2016-17 school year, we had 228 students that were identified as English language learners. In 2017-18, we have 256, and that's an increase of 28 students, or a 12% increase in students who are English language learners. Our economically disadvantaged students in 2016 had 212, and in 2017-18, 235. So we have 23 more students that qualify for free and reduced breakfast and lunch, and that's 11% increase year over year. Students with disabilities, those students that come that have an individual education plan, in 2016-17 we had 365. This 2017-18 had 388. So that's 23 more students, or an increase of 6%. And then our total enrollment from 16-17 to 17-18 went from 2670 to 2698, increase of 28 students, or an increase of 1%. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
What's the breakdown between grades or even schools? I mean, where do you see most of the increase in those categories? Do you know?
We can get that information for you. We have it in a chart. And we have them in 3 different charts: English language learners, special ed, and our poverty students. So if you'd like, we can.
Yeah, I'd just be interested to see that. Yeah.
We can certainly pull that together.
And are these categories mutually exclusive? That is to say, there is not one student that crosses over one or more of these?
It's a really great question, Mr. Z. They are not mutually exclusive, so there may be some students that are, for example, special education students who are also in poverty. But what's important to note about this is, while there may be overlap among and between these categories, they're still independent services that we're providing. So we're providing an independent special education service, and we're providing an independent free and reduced lunch, for example, for the same student. So regardless, it still has an impact.
Do we have data on other school systems? I mean, are our numbers in these categories consistent or less or more than other neighboring school systems?
We know that from a percentage standpoint, in a couple of these categories, we outpace many of the surrounding school districts, but in some we're less than. So for example, we have fewer students in poverty as a total percentage of population than some other surrounding jurisdictions. We're pushing towards some parity in the language acquisition or LEAP student population, but we are among the highest rates of special needs students in the region.
And do we know why?
I could speculate why. From what I understand, when we talk to parents, they come here for a reason. And I would say that we are a destination district for students with disabilities because we provide extraordinary service, and our teachers do a really outstanding job. I know Ms. Hardy is trying to jump in.
Go back to the flat and or the decreased enrollment. levels? Is it decreasing by housing type?
We've done some analysis of where we are looking at the student populations where it drops. We tend to see it at transition points. So students who go from 5th grade to 6th grade or 8th grade to 9th grade. Sometimes parents, I'm presuming that parents see that that's a good time to make a move, to make a change, whatever the case may be. So that's traditionally where we're seeing the biggest jumps are in those transition periods. So often it's between TJ. Henderson and the high school.
I think that housing chart, which we all pour over every year, I think would be really insightful too. I know last year's, if I recall looking at it, I think we had expected growth in pretty much everywhere, except we actually had decreases at Oakwood and maybe Roosevelt Towers. And so I know that we probably are more impacted in those places by State Department kind of influxes. So I'm curious if that is another kind of root cause too.
We have that chart that we can make available.
Great.
And just want to add to the question that Mr. Duncan had asked. I think with that special needs population, I think we, for a number of years, have always been a destination point for the students, that parents talk amongst themselves in the region and all look at us to a place that provides very good services within that particular special population. So that number is not an unusual number. It's one that's been around for a number of years within the school district.
All right. So when I think about, much like Mr. Shields did earlier tonight, some of the budget drivers that we have, our major area, again, of focus is around salaries. Much like Mr. Shields' presentation, we are very much interested in finding ways to regionally recruit the very best talent that there is out there. So we do need to pay attention to our salaries. So in our budget cost drivers, you'll see a step increase. Last year, we did not provide a step increase to our employees, and we are considering that for this year. And a step increase for us would cost us $1.1 million for our employees. A cost of living adjustment for our employees, similar to what Mr. Shields and Ms. Bawa shared. A 1% for us actually is $400,000 because we have subsequently more employees in our division. And then substitute pay, one of the things that we feel like we need to make some inroads on and headway on this year is figuring out how to shore up our substitute pool, and part of the way that we can do that is by making some potential modifications to the subpay. Not unlike the general government, we also are anticipating about a 10% increase in healthcare costs, and for the school division, that's a $315,000 ticket item. And then there are some other moving parts that we need to pay attention to, and the first is the movement of our teachers from Thomas Jefferson Elementary and second grade over to Mount Daniel. The kids won't move. The kids will actually stay and just continue from first grade to second grade there, but our teachers and staff will need to make that move. So there will be some infrastructure needs and the like to make that second grade move. We are looking at potentially the need for another part-time social worker, some behavioral support, parent liaison because of our shifting populations, and then increasing costs for materials, supplies, and services. So as you look at those numbers, we are looking at, if we were to do a step, a COLA, substitute pay, and healthcare for our staff, which are all just purely salary and benefits driven, looking at about $1.7 million in need from a school's perspective. So if you look at the costs per pupil in comparison across the Washington Area Boards of Education, City of Falls Church is the fourth bar over. Our 2019 approved cost per pupil is $18,544. It is among certainly the highest in the region, and part of the reason that it is the highest, one of the highest in the region, is that there is a commitment in the City of Falls Church to provide the highest quality educational services to our students. And when we maintain a class size that we maintain, which are small, that means that we need to have more teachers, which drives up the cost, which ends up being a higher cost per pupil for the region. The last thing I want to point out in our presentation is also our budget calendar so that you can see it. There are some overlaps between the general governments and the schools, but starting with December 18th, we will have a budget work session with the school board. On January 8th, I will propose the budget to the school board. On the 15th, we'll have a budget work session. On the 12th, there'll be a public hearing and another budget work session. On February 19th, a budget work session, and that's the evening that the school board will adopt the FY 2020 advertised budget. And then from there, we will roll into the schedule that was outlined by Mr. Shields. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, your questions, and your thoughts on behalf of the schools.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions to Dr. Noonan? Mr. Duncan?
First thing I wanted to ask, thank you for that information, is our capacity now in our buildings from Thackeray all the way up to the high school sufficient to meet our student count?
It will be. It will be when the new high school is built, yes.
I assumed it would be when the new high school is built. Where do we stand actually just right now, snapshot?
A snapshot in this moment, we need some space at Thomas Jefferson. And we're going to be able to create some of that space by moving the second grade over to Mount Daniel next year, which then we'll have 3 grades at Mount Daniel and 3 grades at Thomas Jefferson, and that very large 5th grade class that everybody's affectionately come to know and love, which is about 225 students, will be moving on to Henderson, which will push the limits of capacity a little bit at Henderson, but we'll still be able to accommodate that. So
it's safe to say that by next September, because of the moves, we would be okay in terms of we wouldn't be over capacity as a system.
We don't anticipate being over capacity as a system. I think we need to look out into the next 3 to 5 years. And the reason that we need to the reason that we need to continue to pay attention is we do have a cap at Mount Daniel, and if we hit that cap, we may need to do some reshuffling and move some students back to Thomas Jefferson, which then would put pressure on Jefferson.
The reason I ask, it's a good news story. I think I heard on the radio today about Arlington's situation. I think I heard a number that said that they're, at a 9% deficit in terms of facilities to enrollment. So they're in a bind. I mean, they really need to, and are planning to, I think, undertake an aggressive building campaign, which hopefully means they'll raise their tax rate some so that it won't be so much different from ours. But, we all deserve a pat on the back. Everybody, going back to the Q-SCAB bonds for TJ, I mean, everybody for the last 10, 12 years has kept their eye on the facilities ball so that we will, certainly within, hopefully, 3 years with the new high school, be in a very good position. And that's good. I mean, that took a lot of courage and effort and expense, and, that's paid off. I just wanted to point that out at the beginning. My only other question, and I don't have a long speech or anything about it, you'll be happy to know, is as I understand it, the numbers that Ms. Bawa, Mr. Shields presented give natural growth gives us $1.7 million in additional money next year. And Mr. Shields' shopping list has got what it's got on it. Everybody can look at that and see what it is. And your shopping list has got what it's got on it. And back of the envelope suggests that's together a number significantly bigger than 1.7 million. So I hope you all will share with us either tonight or individually or whatever what you think we should do. I mean, I'm really curious to know. You understand the pressures that we face and the things we're trying to do for the city as a whole, and I think we understand and appreciate what you're trying to do. So I hope we'll have the same kind of dialogue about the budget that we've had very constructively about the high school and other facilities issues, which have worked out nicely. And I look forward to that.
Mr. Z.
Thanks for that presentation. I know that this is a good start. Can you provide us with a better perspective on area COLAs so that we can help you figure out what the right COLA number is, and the school board as well?
Yeah. We certainly can give you some background information. We've got year over year of surrounding jurisdictions, who's given them when, and the amounts. I'm not sure necessarily that we would be looking at I'm not sure what I'm going to propose. I need to talk to the board, but I'm not sure that I would be looking at a very large COLA. I think our focus really needs to be on the step increase so that our teachers continue in their salary grade and lane moving forward.
Appreciate hearing that, and thank you. That's perfect data.
Mr. Lichtenhouse.
Yep. Thanks for that. I recall a conversation last year that I had with one of you guys, I don't remember who it was, related to student services, where I guess as it relates to special needs, if there was a service that we couldn't provide for a specific student, that we would pay for that service to be provided outside of our school district. Did I remember that correctly?
Yes,
okay.
sir.
So if our school district is becoming a destination for the types of services that we provide for students with special needs, is that reciprocated by other jurisdictions? Meaning if we were to offer something that another jurisdiction couldn't provide, do they do the same thing that we would?
You mean would they place a student in a private day circumstance or the like?
Correct. And pay for that? Or is
Yes.
that they would?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we offer a continuum of services here in the City of Falls Church for all of our special needs students. And there are few opportunities for students that don't that we can't meet the needs completely for. And when that happens, there are other placements where students can go, and it's no different than anywhere else.
Okay. But it's fairly rare. We provide pretty much everything that
It's
student would
a
need
small number, but we're a small jurisdiction, and we are limited in capacity because we are small. And so we take it as far as we can, but there are times where we have to do some private day placements.
And is it an all or nothing, or is it a partial service, meaning we can provide part of that and then we pay for those services in other jurisdictions, whatever that other piece is? Is that how that works?
Well, first of all, we don't actually pay for services to other jurisdictions. Okay. These are private day placements typically,
I don't understand.
or private placements. So, for example, if a student needs to go to is experiencing some significant behavior issues that need some sort of day treatment, which it would include some therapy services, perhaps some psychological services and the like, that we just don't have the capacity in our schools to provide, then we might look at the Keller Center, for example, and talk to the Keller Center and say, we have a student we'd like you to take a look at, and they would say, yes, we'll take the student, and then we pay the fee to the Keller Center to serve that student. With respect to your first question, is it partial day, is it full day? It just depends, and it really is on a student-by-student, case-by-case situation. We have students that are transitioning back from Dominion facility, for example, for part of the day, and they may have services at Dominion. We have some students that might be even in Maryland for a service, and we take those students there because that's the best placement for them, and they might come back for a period or two a day.
Okay.
Just to clarify, Ross, when it comes to the extraordinary services that Peter was discussing, those tend to be federally mandated, that they're government mandated. There's not something that, Peter or our director of special needs will say, oh, let's just send them to the special service. But it's something that goes through the 503C process, that there's a lot of experts involved and outside opinions. So it's not something that we're just making the decision on.
It was obviously Shauna that I had the conversation with last
No,
year.
there's a whole convening of the IEP team that comes together, and it is a broad collaborative process.
I was just trying to think about it in the context of enrollment numbers, and again, I don't know how that's calculated, and also in terms of you talking about our jurisdiction or Falls Church being a jurisdiction that's a destination, how that works in terms of revenues coming into the school system versus leaving the school system. So I was just looking for some context on that. But I don't need to get into all the detail tonight. I can have a sidebar conversation with Shauna again, I'm sure.
But I will mention that those students do count as part of our population of students that we serve. So if we're sending a student out who's receiving a $50,000 a year service because we can't provide it, it is one of our students here in the city that we serve that we have to pay for.
Other comments, questions?
Could I ask, just out of curiosity, does that, for example, $50,000 student, does their performance count into your student achievement percentages on reading, math, and science, and so forth? I mean, if you're getting a larger population of children who, you know, have special needs, is that going to be showing up in our student achievement numbers?
Actually, glad you asked that. And I'm glad you asked it because I think it's a really good news story about the incredible work that our teachers are doing day in and day out. Even with the changes and shifts in population, one might think that perhaps with an influx of more students that are English language learners or more students with disabilities, that our performance would actually decline, and we're not seeing that decline. In fact, we're staying very steady, and it's because our teachers are well skilled in being able to differentiate instruction. So to put a finer point on it, all of our students count in our student data.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Hardy?
I had just a more general request for both city manager and superintendent. So I think a couple weeks ago we heard from the city demographers to talk about kind of projections of where our population was going. I know that the Weldon Cooper Center does a lot more specific student enrollment projections, but it feels like we should make sure they're all talking to each other because there's some really interesting data that we had heard a couple weeks ago about where the city population was going. I think two that stood out to me is one, in fact, we actually have more households in the city without kids now. And then even though our school enrollment population has grown, we actually see the increases from, I think we called it the 3 is the new 2. So there are more families in single-family houses that have 3 kids that might be needing school system services as opposed to other places. So there's some just interesting trends that I thought we should just compare notes on, especially as we think about long-term capacity needs and where the city's going and making sure we think about a budget that kind of serves the entire city. So I don't know whether we can get those demographers to work with Weldon Cooper or just somehow share data. So more of a request for both of you.
We can certainly talk to each other and see what I have and what he has. And
or just
we'll
get the
see what we
demographers
can-
and scientists to work together. And
Yep.
Thank you.
Could I actually, it reminds, so in the same way that we watch the worm crawl on, B-poll and meals taxes, we try to get every month, every quarter, certainly every quarter. Do you all, in tracking your enrollment month to month, see, harbingers of what you're going to see the next September? As I understand it, right now, enrollment's been down 2 years, and now we're projecting that it's going to be up 54 next year. Well, says who? And when is it that we'd be likely to have some indication of that? Is it unique to the school situation that, people move in August and start their kids in September, and that's the first time you get any kind of inkling, or is there some indication through the year?
That again is another question that's says who is Weldon Cooper. We're really putting a lot of stock in their numbers and the information that they share with us. But we do track it month to month. We do monthly updates. We've received those from our information technology folks. But the real sort of question in our minds that doesn't provide the clarity we wish it would is, one, the kindergarten number, because there's a lot of fluctuation in how many kids come to kindergarten from year to year. A lot of people will stay in a private placement in their preschool and do kindergarten there and then start school in first grade. And now that we've done the analysis looking at how many of our students are leaving after 5th grade and not going on or moving to a different middle school, or how many of our students are leaving at the end of 8th grade to go to a different high school. So those are the 3 really critical areas, I think, that are a little bit more complex to try to suss out. But we do look at those monthly reports. We do track month to month, year to year. We look at cohorts year over year, and we do put some stock in Weldon Cooper.
Vice Mayor Conley?
Ladies first.
Thanks. Okay, so here's, as we've talked in the budget and finance meeting as well as here, one of the things that has come up over time is it seems like people need a deeper understanding of how we're paying employees. So maybe I should read the disclaimer before I start asking this question. Mm-hmm. But it just seems like council members need a deeper understanding of what is the step What is a step? What is a COLA? How does the city pay employees? How do we keep our employees? And I'm wondering if we can schedule a work session during the budget time or ahead of the budget time to just delve deeply so we can all understand that, so we go forward and we don't have these same questions over time. Does that make sense?
It does. We are going to have the same questions.
We'll have the same questions, but maybe we'll have some similar answers so we're not all guessing or supposing or assuming. I think that would be very helpful, especially because it seems like the schools are 86% salaries, and one of Mr. Shields' big drivers this year is how are we going to maintain our high-quality workforce.
All right.
Just a couple of observations. First of all, Ms. Hardy, I think one of the interesting things, I think, is the effect of the Great Recession on family size. And if you look, the biggest class, the biggest small class after the Great Recession is smaller than all the classes on the other side. So I think there may be an adjustment in family size, and that's something that I think we're looking at. With respect to, we have to estimate head count, and you have to estimate revenues, and it seems to me we're more or less in the same ballpark of, plus or minus a couple percentage points, and I hope we keep in that area. I had a question about ratios, kind of to Ms. Connolly's question about head count. In terms of and money, if you look at a COLA for the school is $400,000 for each percent. For the general government, it's $200,000. So does that mean there's more or less a 2-to-1 ratio in number of staff for the two organizations? Are they mostly paid in the same ballpark?
I don't know. I will just tell you, we have 500, in round numbers, 500 school employees. I don't know what the number is.
And we have, in round numbers, 190. 199.
So 500 school employees, 200 city employees.
Okay, so that's, so it's, the 2-to-1 there is sort of ballpark. So why then wouldn't it be, so I guess that kind of explains why it's not the same ratio. Our health insurance is $315 versus $200, which is like 1.5 to 1. I guess that's because premiums don't vary as much as salaries seem to. Am I right on that? On average?
We're actually on the same health plan.
Yeah, we are, except there are a lot of fluctuations between single, double, family, and so those are completely different maths.
And then, Dr. Noonan, I was wondering if you could talk about the teacher shortage that we're going through, and one of the school board's legislative priorities is going to be to ask the General Assembly for more assistance in developing a body of teachers that can meet needs going forward, especially in this competitive environment. I was wondering, Dr. Noonan, if you can talk about the teacher talent challenge that we have.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Castillo. We continue to have a teacher talent issue and shortage. There was a time, and I would say as recently as 5 to 7 years ago, that every time we had an opening, at least in my previous division, we'd have between 7 and 10 applicants for that position. Now we're seeing 2 or 3. So we already are seeing a decline, and we're one of the best school districts in the country. And so there are a number of things that are at afoot that are happening right now to sort of help with some of these teacher challenges, teacher shortage challenges. One is that there's a move to change the teacher licensure program at the state level insofar as public universities will be able to offer a 4-year teaching degree, which has not been the case previously. It had been a teacher got a 4-year degree in a content area and then went back, or got a teaching degree and then went back, got a 2-year degree in content, or a 1.5 years in content. So oftentimes we're going to school for much longer than those 4 years. There also is, as Mr. Castillo indicated in our legislative package, the hope for support for licensure, and also for trying to develop a process by which our teachers across the Commonwealth can be paid at least the average teacher salary in the country. We actually are $10,000 less than the teacher salary average teacher salary across the country here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So there are a number of things that we're trying to pay attention to, because we know that whether we like it or not, as great as our school system is and as great as the services are that we provide to our teachers, that salary does matter, and it is an attractive piece for us. And we make a good case when we get out there to say, you get to know your kids, it's very small, it's very comfortable, we have great facilities coming online, but at the end of the day, when they have a choice between one school district and another, and in the school district right next door, they could make $5,000 more, it makes a difference. So when you're competing for talent with 3 candidates instead of 5 or 7, like we used to have, salary matters.
Yeah, and I guess I would just close with one other point. And given that we're a 10th of the size of Arlington and 100th of the size of Fairfax County. So one student in a class will move the numbers for that class 0.5%. And so the law of small numbers, I think, makes it very hard to make too many extrapolations from year to year. And I think one of the things that we'll see is there's going to be lumpiness in various aspects of the numbers. And there's nothing we can do about that other than do the best we can.
Sort of add a follow-on question to that. One comment, though, from a recruiting standpoint, I mean, it's absolutely horrendous trying to attract talent in both the private and public sector. We run across the same thing day in and day out. You've got kids coming out of college that their expectations from salary to what it's going to be like work culture is just, it's insane. But in any event, so it is a challenge all the way around. And I think the next cycle may make it a little bit easier to attract, but it's just really, really tight. Just one question for you all, and this does go to the recruiting and the tight labor market. How much in terms of affordability within Falls Church plays into that conversation? I would imagine quite a bit.
It matters. It matters a lot. We've actually seen a decline in the number of staff and teachers that live in the city of Falls Church. We have about 20% of our workforce that live in the city now. And previous to that, within the last 5 years, it was between 35 and 40%. And it matters to commute, to just the work-life balance. And one of the things we know with millennials in particular is that they want it to be as simple and as straightforward as possible. And when you add a commute like that, it does impact their ability to be creative and thoughtful and the like. So we're hearing that. And just by the way, on that note, since you brought it up, if you don't mind, and you'll indulge me for 30 seconds, it also comes into play with snow calls. Because when 80% of our staff don't live in the city and are having to commute up to 50 miles to get here, we have to take into consideration having staff in our buildings on those days, and when they can't get here, our kids aren't safe either. So.
Yeah, I think it's important because we spend a lot of time talking about housing affordability in this city, and I think sometimes what gets lost in that conversation is workforce housing. And I think it's important because there's a residual effect, not only in work-life balance and the snow calls and things like that, but also from a budgetary perspective and a recruiting perspective, and so we have to think beyond just one particular segment of the population and look at the individuals that are actually serving our community, because it can have a very material impact in situations like this. Okay, thanks.
Wyatt or Cindy?
Do we have those
same question?
Same numbers for the city side?
We can get those, but I think it is a high ratio that lives outside the city. I mean,
that lives outside.
It has a similar impact. We actually keep a lot of public works and police staff in the city when we have a threat, because we can't risk them not being able to get back. So you pay for them to stay, then you pay for them while they're responding.
Mm-hmm.
We can get that numbers for you.
Just maybe the mayor bring this up, but I noticed your budget calendar has us voting on April 22nd, which, as I would recall, is about a week after we all pay our federal taxes. Does Budget Finance or anybody have any read on the impact of the change in deductibility on, the typical homeowner's tax bill here?
We haven't done the math on the average homeowner tax bill. I think it is reasonable to assume, though, that when we're talking about fairly I mean, you think nationally the economy is doing pretty well, that you might see higher assessed value growth if it weren't for that policy change at the federal level. I think it's impacting home buyers.
Oh, I see. So it's depressing, really, here in Smallville?
Well, I think it has to be.
Wow.
You know, people, when they're making a home buying decision, they do the calculation as to what their monthly payment is going to be and what the tax implications are. And that's changed dramatically in the last 12 months.
Has there been anything similar to this kind of environment in any budget year you can think of recently? You know, we're sort of flying blind on an important question, right? I mean, we really doesn't sound like we're going to have an answer to that when we vote on the city budget. I mean, what the average homeowner's federal tax obligation is going to be.
Well, that was in effect last year as well. So this isn't the first year that it's in effect, but
Yeah, right. It's the first time you've paid your taxes into it, right?
let me
Okay, yeah,
see if that analysis can be done. I think it actually would be pretty hard for us to do, I will say, because we don't know what people's income tax filings are. But
It won't be hard for us to hear people the week that we vote on the budget, because I think, I mean, my sense is that it's not going to hit my tax bill, I don't think, because my house is small enough, but there are a lot of people who.
Mr. Shields, what we do know is the cap on the property tax deduction. So we do know what our average property tax bills in the city are. So we don't know how it'll impact people's incomes. We do know that, you know, out of city tax bills, how many of those will be capped and what that impact might be. Okay.
that's knowable.
Are there any other questions or comments? Our next item really is sort of something we've bled into already, which is our discussion of budget guidance. Is there any other comments or questions people have? Anything anyone else would like to say? All right, well, thank you all for coming out this evening. We look forward to working collaboratively as we've done in the past years to get to the finish line. So a lot of good work. Thank you very
Mayor,
much.
And can I just pass out one schedule for folks while people are together? This is a schedule of upcoming campus planning meetings, specifically related to the economic development portion of it. But Ms. Aubrey has put this schedule together. It's fairly handy and easy to look at, and it's really just the series of meetings that are coming up in the month of December. And two, I will note, is the Sunday, December 16th Town Hall, the Sunday series meeting. We plan to have the development team present at that meeting, and we plan to sort of expressly invite boards and commission members to come to that meeting for a briefing on the project and question and answer and possibly some breakout sessions.
And from a school's perspective, we'd like to thank you and welcome to the barrel.
Yes. A lot of the recent Sunday series have been really focused on the school schematic designs and design considerations, so we're going to shift focus in our next town series on the 10-acre development. And then the other one I'll just note for the group is Tuesday, December 18th. We plan to be on your agenda with the school board to have the development team there to give a brief presentation and answer any questions that you might have of them directly. The Campus Coordinating Committee has been meeting regularly, and their last meeting was last Friday, and I think that group is serving to be a very effective place where we can work through design issues, and I think that's going to become more intense over the coming weeks.
Can I make a quick schedule request? While we're talking about schedules, I think the past few years we've been doing an MLK Day of Service, and so I think staff is helping me plan something again on 1/21, and so I would love to have the school board join the city council in doing a service activity around the city. So more to come. If y'all have suggestions on where organizations that would like help, we're all ears, but hopefully we can carve out some time and work together on that.
Yes, Vice Mayor.
And before the school board goes, I just want to mention that at the end of our budget season last year, we had discussions about initiating a revenue sharing agreement. And I know that our city staff and school staff have worked hard on that. And unfortunately, we do not have a revenue sharing agreement to present to everyone tonight. But the discussion has been fascinating, just how we can structure sharing revenue in the future, what the floor would be, what the ceiling would be, how we would deal with revenue overages and underages. Sometimes it always comes back to the same $400,000 every year that is the gap. But we have not come to a revenue sharing agreement that we're going to share tonight. But it is definitely part of the priorities as we plan this budget. How can we work together on this? So I want to really thank everyone for the time that they put into working together on this.
All right, thank you. On our schedule is some scheduling requests. Is there any council scheduling requests that needs to be done right now? If not, again, thank you all for coming together, and we look forward to a great collaboration. So, thank you.
We're here at item number 3, council discussion of FY 2020 budget guidance.
I move we
Mayor
begin
Tardy, do you have
discussion of
anything to
item number
say?
3.
Mr. Shields, do you have anything to say about the budget guidance?
The staff report does have a summary of the presentation that Ms. Bawa gave, and I'll just give a note of some of the features of last year's budget guidance, and the intent is really just to set up a discussion for the council to give direction for we can then take build language and bring it back to you for consideration next week on December 10th. Just as a note, in the whereases for the resolution, it does state that this is intended to provide a framework for the city manager and the school board as they develop a proposed budget for presentation next spring that is aligned with fiscal projections as well as citywide goals as expressed in the CIP and other items. So that was the way it was phrased last year. And then there's the last whereas that notes the fact that there's a lot of public input, and the council will listen to that input before it makes its final decisions with budget adoption. In other words, this is just preliminary guidance, and things can change. In the guidance statement itself, I'm not going to read the whole statement, but each of the bullets had sort of one thought behind it, and I'll just list what those thoughts were. The opening paragraph discusses maintaining excellent schools and excellent general government services, and promoting a high quality of life in the city. Bullet 1 is about cost effectiveness, and that's a discussion about efficiency and looking for ways to provide services as cost effectively as possible. The next 2 bullets were the fiscal, sort of the discipline bullets in last year's guidance. Bullet number 4, compliance with fiscal policies. Bullet 5 is have a multi-year look at budgeting. Present multi-year projections with the budget. Bullet 6 is employee compensation that is competitive within the regional market and fully funds the ARC. Bullet 7 is the vibrant community bullet, and that's where the council really laid out its specific things in its work plan that wanted the manager to provide some strategies on how to address. Bullet 8 on the next page, line 170, called for 10-year planning for the CIP for the first time, and we did that with Cindy's leadership. At line 174, it's the NVTA bullet that we take, that the city's paying those taxes and that the city should be there at the table to make sure that those funds are being used for transportation improvements in the city. Line 180, the WMATA bullets. One was to hold WMATA to the 3% cap on operating budgets, which is part of their deal with Virginia, with $150 million that was funded last year. And then another bullet about sustainability. Then the last 2 were bullets about communication. One is the Councilmember Connolly bullet about the ROI for the pension fund, And then the last one is about a good public information and an input possibilities for the budget process. So that was last year's guidance, and again, it's offered just as a way to sort of start the discussion for some of the key priorities for the city council and putting together next year's budget.
Any comments? That's it.
I don't know what bullet numbers this is, but this is the last one on page 4. So NTC and downtown improvements. So I think based on just the volume of requests we've heard from citizens, I would love to see a more concerted effort to increase throughput for both the NTC program and our downtown improvements. So rather than it be side of desk, especially in the downtown improvement stuff, are there options for more kind of creative resourcing of it? You know, could we outsource, contract it out? I think the mayor mentioned the idea of, you know, a half-time FTE even to work on all those downtown improvement ideas we have. But NTC especially, I think my assessment is that we've seen more requests come in than the ones that would get done. And I don't think that's a sustainable pace. And so I think we need to think about how to do more there and faster.
Vice Mayor Connolly, do you have some comments?
One of the things is I watch these budget conversations, and we do this every year. We say, all right, we're going to know that one in February, we're going to know that in March, and we'll know that better in January. And it just seems like we're spinning all these plates. It would be really nice to have some kind of chart that says, here's the item, assessed value growth, and this is when we expect to know what it is. When are these things really going to fall into place? So that everyone has a sense of when they're going to fall into place, so that we're not constantly saying, oh, I don't know about that one yet. Well, when are we going to know about that one? I don't know if that needs to be part of the budget guidance or budget practice.
Well, I mean, it all kind of falls into place with the budget presentation, because at that point, you know the school board's recommendation, you know all the...
Yeah, but even last year, we didn't. We were still waiting on WMATA. I mean, from what you proposed to what we actually passed, there were 3 cents that disappeared.
That's true. So the WMATA was an odd curveball.
Yeah.
There's also always the fact that the state will have not adopted its budget, and sometimes there are big implications with that. And that would be one we could chart out.
Right. I mean, someone said we won't know retirement until March 2019.
No, we'll know retirement
Oh,
in January.
maybe it's WMATA. The
Yeah,
insurance
WMATA.
won't come in until February.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful in the process to just know when things are going to stop spinning, and this is when this is going to happen, and this is when this is going to happen, so that we have a little more stability.
So as far as budget items coming to council, the next time you're gonna hear more on the revenues and the other categories is really gonna be February, the second quarter, and then March, which is the city manager's budget. So you're not gonna hear anything in January. We may find out things in January, but those will be built into the city manager's budget in March. So that's pretty much where we will be. We will have a proposed budget for WMATA. They may not have adopted by March 11th, but as the public hearings go, we may get an adopted budget from WMATA at that time. So as far as we are concerned, any other projections would not come to you till the second quarter, which is the second meeting in February, or and then March 11th, which is the city manager's proposed budget to you.
And a lot of the WMATA resolution will depend on what the General Assembly does this coming legislative session as well. Whether they'll give relief for local jurisdictions to raise supplemental revenues, whether in fact they'll throw some more money into the pot. These things are uncertain at this point. The other one is the Community Services Board. So even if they approve a Medicaid scheme that fixes the funding problem for the CSBs, there's still going to be a 3-month gap that's completely unfunded. So that could be a decision that we would have to make at that point in time. I know that doesn't help. I'm just adding more complexity to this, which is why Wyatt showed those things as unknown items. A bunch of those things do depend on what the General Assembly and the governor decide to do this coming winter.
So that's what I meant by spinning plates. They're just all out there, and they're going to affect our final decision, one way or the other. So they're the levers that we've talked about in the past. How do we make use of those levers to say, well, there might be a little more extra here because CSB is well taken care of. Great. Where shall we put that?
So can we grab the big lever first? And let me ask each of you, philosophically, however much money we're going to spend more, $1.7 million or whatever the number is that going to be divided equally between the city and the schools? Because in past years, that's not been, where we started and certainly not where we ended. Do I hear you saying, because you're interested in more expenditures for neighborhood traffic calming and downtown improvements, and we need to pay, salaries that will enable us to hire good engineers and good people to oversee this $500 million project, that this council philosophically starts this budget year saying it's going to be 50-50? Doesn't have to be exactly that, but it's not going to be 85-15 or 90-10, because there have been years when we told the manager that his budget had to be, flat or less.
As we looked at the revenue sharing agreement, Ms. Bawa did a very nice, just over time, what is the split of funds between the schools and this general government? Taking out things like WMATA and other expenses. And what did it come out to be? 60?
1/6 of the general tax, 61.16 of the general tax revenues for the schools. And the remaining for the city. And that tax revenues exclude the permits and the grants and those kind of things.
And how did you portion the capital expenses?
We use fiscal year 19 as the base year to come up with that calculation.
But I thought it was sort of over time, it was about 61-39.
So is that the answer to my question? So you'd advocate going in 60-40-ish split? Let's just say you were going to spend $1.7 million, but whatever the number is.
So the way it was modeled was that it takes into account the use of the capital reserve, the debt service, the WMATA, CNIE, and the 1% on TOT, and after that, whatever is left, the 61% is towards the school, and the 38%, whatever, towards the city. That's how it was modeled.
Okay, I don't mean for this to be complicated. I assume you'll figure it out some way that, we don't count the permits revenue because that accrues to us, and we count the CIP stuff in a way that benefits the schools a little bit. So that all comes out in the wash. What I'm asking is, based on all the things that we talk about here that the city side needs, is a 60-40 split of the new money, whatever the amount is, where you want to start the discussion.
Well, I cannot support a guidance document that puts 60-40 in right from the very beginning without knowing anything more than we have been presented tonight. I didn't even whip out my phone to add the numbers up, even though I'm sure that somebody else has done the numbers already. I cannot support that.
I'm just asking.
The other thing is, as the number of employees, so how do you, if the schools have 500 employees and the city has 200 employees, do you divide it by the number of employees, since it seems like it's a very employee-driven year? Then that's a 50, I don't know what that is, 70-30. So I agree with Mr. Z. I think it's premature to determine a split right now, although if we had a revenue sharing agreement, that's what we would be doing.
Okay, well, that's sort of what I was asking. So we're not comfortable doing that. That's fine. We're not comfortable doing that. What other lever is there to grab? That so much of the costs are personnel driven.
Well, I think to your point then, it's in bullet number 3 here where it sets a 2% growth relative to last year's budget. So, there may be some traction in exploring what that could be, given our discussion that we've heard, the presentation on how hard it is to attract and retain staff.
Can we say that it's within the range of revenue growth? I mean, you said we're about 2% revenue growth, but suppose we end up at 3% revenue growth by some miracle, because everyone's shopping local in the month of November and it shot up. We're all through the roof. So if you put it then within the range of revenue, so it's not 2%, it's keep it within the revenue that we have expected, projected. And then as those plates are firmed up and we know exactly what revenue growth is going to be, I don't know. It's hard to start with that, though, if you don't know what the final is.
Right. I would also say that it is all the financial analysts and people in the real estate industry. I mean, they're seeing the softening in the construction and the housing markets and the consumer spending. These all line up with industry-wide trends that I'm looking at with regard to investments, and so nothing there surprises me. I think that we will be probably looking at some sort of downturn at the end of this coming year, and certainly people, not this year, but next year and a half from now, that there will be a softening in revenues and other kinds of things. And so if that's true, I think that we might want to hedge it by providing some guidance with respect to how we apportion the funds that we spend. That is to say, we spend first on people, we spend second on traffic calming, and then, you know, somewhere there we probably have to put other priorities and then say, you know, these things tear down, cascade down, and not lesser importance, but because being mindful of how much they cost and how much work is involved, that we have to make some hard choices. If we could hard code those kinds of things, I think, if nothing else, that would give assurance to people in the city that we're actually being mindful of some possibility that would be adverse, and instead of hearing the cries of pain later on.
Those are good comments, I think. But when you say people, spend money on people, what are we talking about? Are we talking about filling the vacancies that we have now and paying them, you know, enough to get them filled, rather than looking to add, you know, even a half FTE in anticipation of a softening, a weakening, and on the school side, and again here, I'm not advocating, I'm just trying to figure out how to message. If enrollment has been down the last 2 years, it is a message challenge to explain why it is we need more personnel. It just is. And there's a very good explanation for it, that we heard it tonight, but it is something that you have to explain. And so on the city side, the same thing. I mean, are we looking to, in anticipation of a soft year, not like staffing over, but just filling the positions we've got? Or are you thinking you would, you know, the HR situation, I don't know, you've consolidated things that we've gotten through almost a whole year with. Are we going to try to do that for another year? Are we going to hire an HR director? What kind of money are we spending on new positions, sailing into the winds that Mr. Z describes?
You know, I think these are all things that do need to be worked out. The human resources, what we've learned through this process is that human resources does need dedicated leadership. And Cindy has been doing a wonderful job with it, but she is doing many things. She runs our capital improvements program. She oversees our IT department. She does her legislative program. Any kind of a special project, it goes to Cindy. And so we do not have 100% dedicated HR person, and there's a big consequence to that. So we've been making it work through, I think, really great efforts, but it is something that we're still kind of working through in terms of how we actually are making sure our employees are in a position to serve effectively and to be successful.
Well, and to Mr. Duncan's point, you can't be in constant surge mode, because then you have no reserve capacity to take on anything else should it come up. I mean, I would not be surprised if right now your assistant city manager is also project managing the completion of City Hall. Thank you.
I just want to confirm something Mr. Duncan just said. You just mentioned the school enrollment and not wanting to hire other employees. What is your thinking on employees, Dr. Noonan?
Thank you. At this point in the process, we don't anticipate adding any personnel, and we didn't add any classroom teachers last year either.
So if we talk about, as Mr. Z said, people first.
Yeah.
Yours is salary improvements and benefits.
It'd be salary enhancements and benefits only.
For the existing staff.
Correct.
Again, if we're explaining what it is that we're going to do, whatever we're going to do, that's in spite of the fact that we're growing as a city, and enrollment's probably going to grow and so forth. And in this particular year, we're not going to grow the employee base significantly. With occasional rare exceptions that the manager may bring to us on our side, because we have been, constrained significantly in every recent year that I can remember.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, I mean, the chart that Kieran showed has general government expenses going up like 1.3% on average for the past 3 years. Over that same period of time, we have given an average of a 3% increase in pay for employees. So what that has meant is fewer employees, like the HR position, but also the economic development director position. And there's many other examples of that. Anytime a department director is trying to move staff or reorganize to accomplish new strategic objectives, they're always doing it in a flat or essentially a negative budget environment. And so that, our ability there are things on maintenance and paving and sort of those basic things, that's generally where that gets pinched in order to do those things.
Things that we end up coming to you to complain most about. I mean, let's hire somebody to paint the friggin' lines on the road, Well, that gets to be an issue. It takes months to do that for reasons. Okay, well, then another angle of attack is, okay, if we're just basically going to hire the positions that we've got now that are vacant and the schools are going to stay about where they are, what is the expectation that is being created among the workforce about what their pay increase is going to be? And I won't try to categorize it as COLA or whatever, but what are people thinking? I mean, I see there's numbers here which are helpful about the CPI, and it's about 2. I mean, if that's the expectation that you're creating, what kind of budget are we looking at? Strikes me that's more than 1.7 million unless the only thing you do is devote all the increase to pay.
Yeah, I mean, the other options are to not do other things and to not fill other vacancies. I mean, it really would come down to positions not filled. To make it, to make things work.
So to me, what we ought to be thinking about tonight is guidance, right? So in the next week, we're going to be asked to give the city and the schools some guidance as to what percentage increase they'll be receiving next year. And that's not immutable. It can change, obviously. If revenues change, that can change. If priorities change, it can change as well. But I think the purpose of tonight is really to prepare ourselves for next week to fundamentally, what do we want to do? Not necessarily how do we want someone else to divide it up, because that's something that I think is premature and we don't have control on some of that. To me, the more fundamental question tonight is what are our expectations for an increase for next year? And that comes back also to tax increases. Are people willing to have a tax increase for operations? And if you're not, then the answer is city and school budgets go up by about 2%. unless revenues go up by more than that. Or it gets shifted so one gets 1 and one gets 3, but the bottom line is collectively, things will go up at present projections at 2%, unless people want to have a tax increase to fund operational increases beyond that. And so to me, that's the fundamental question for maybe not tonight, but next week. And if the answer is people don't want to raise taxes, then I think the guidance is probably 2%, unless people want to divvy it up some way other than 2 and 2. So anyway, that's what I think the attention ought to be focused on tonight, not necessarily how would you do this, how would you do that. I think that is a relevant question. I'm just not sure it's as relevant tonight as what is your fundamental mindset about what the revenues are going to be. So, I mean, to me, that's where we ought to be focusing our attention so that we're prepared next week to do that. Maybe people aren't prepared to offer an opinion as to whether they want to raise taxes for operations or not, but that, I think, is the crux of the matter.
So my big frustration with this guidance last year is that the third bullet was we shouldn't raise any more than 2% relative to FY18. And then further down, we talked about a level of employee compensation that is competitive within the regional labor market. And those two things were, last year, and I think this year too, were completely in conflict with each other. So there was no way to do both of those things.
But I mean, let me ask you on that,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
to press you, but I'm not looking at it right now, and I probably couldn't see it if I was looking at it, but it says competitive, right? I mean, what do you view competitive as? I mean, is competitive somewhere you're in the middle? Does it only mean you're at the top? What is your view of competitive?
Well, I think it goes to what we've just been talking about here. It's hard to recruit engineers. It's hard to recruit the best teachers in a teacher shortage. So that's why I asked if we could have a work session on compensation and just to figure out what is competitive. Because what does that mean? It means a lot of different things.
Can I make a comment on that? And this is, again, at the peril of looking at this from a private sector perspective. It's a bit of a fool's errand for us to chase some of the higher compensation that is out there right now to fill some of these positions, or just to look to hire the best people. We obviously want to hire the best people. It's not that you shouldn't. It's just that unless we are willing to make tough choices when the recession hits, which it inevitably will, 2020 is going to be rough. I will go on the record and say that. Unless we are willing to look at some of those same hires that we chase because we needed somebody to fill a position and it was just exorbitantly expensive, and make some very tough decisions, I want to be very careful and judicious in the way that we have that conversation about what's considered competitive compensation. If this was a different point in the economic cycle, I might think differently, but just knowing what the expectations are out there for some of the positions that we're trying to fill, making a rush to fill those positions without a bit of a judicious conversation related to what we should be willing to pay, and just understanding what decisions we may need to make in terms of staffing when we don't even see positive revenue growth, when things are much worse than we might otherwise think they would be. So it's just a word of caution, because again, we've seen this before, and we're certainly seeing it now. And again, unless we are willing to stomach tough decisions, I just want to be careful how we begin and have that conversation.
So, I mean, I obviously we're not making a decision tonight, but I mean, I guess going back to what I said just a couple minutes ago, to me, that's sort of the crux of the matter is, are people willing to increase taxes for operations? Or if you want to hold the line on taxes, then I think the number is collectively 2% to be divvied up one way or the other at some point in time.
Well, if we hold the line on taxes, and we certainly have a good story. I mean, it's 2%, 2 point whatever, is better than nothing. We are arguably in better shape than our surrounding jurisdictions. That'll be the first argument that people bring to us. But primarily, I think, for me, it's a way of keeping our powder dry. And if we have to raise taxes for whatever reason, when the next downturn comes, at least we're going to be able to say we made it through this season. We honored the commitment that we made to you, that we've raised the taxes before to cover capital, and so unless something dramatic comes along this year that says we have to raise taxes, I would be really happy if we just kept it where it was.
Okay.
I'm okay with what Mr. Z said. The only use of language term that I would like to educate folks on is that we're talking about the tax rate. You know, your taxes are going to go up, particularly if you're paying more than $10,000, but your taxes are going to go up because your assessments are going up. So we're not talking about an environment where, you know, we're going to keep your tax, because some people genuinely, they hear that and they think that their taxes aren't going to go up. We just need to be very clear that it's the rate that we're talking about, and that's, if we hold it steady, what we get is 2%, $1.7 million to dole out. That's my understanding.
Other comments?
Yeah, since we're going around the horn. I'm not interested in raising the tax rate to fund operations. If we have needs from a capital perspective, and those needs have been identified, and it's something that's out of the ordinary, then it's something that I would consider. Hopefully when we reconcile at the end of the day, it's higher than 2% growth. I was really disappointed that we couldn't reach a more formal presentation of the revenue sharing between the school and the city, although I will commend both sides for having spent an inordinate amount of time working through more details, frankly, than I had ever envisioned in analysis. And I thought it was incredibly insightful, as did the Vice Mayor. I still would like to operate this year in the spirit of that revenue sharing agreement or some modified version of it, in my mind. I thought the analysis in terms of the 60-40 rule was pretty good. I haven't dug into all of the details for that, but we've got 2% to work with. That's what we budgeted. If there's more, great. We can divide that up. So in my mind, it's looking at any kind of extraordinary needs that we might have, where that, if that needs to be kind of taken out of the equation. Otherwise, you know, I'd like to see a revenue share within the confines of the revenue that the city's going to expect to achieve. Because again, to Mr. Z's point about dry powder, I am very, very concerned about 2020, and I am very concerned about having to make some very tough decisions related to a tax rate, which we can control. Councilman Duncan knows this. We can control the tax rate. We can't control the value. That's driven by the market. But we can control the tax rate, and it's a delicate balance. But my initial guidance to this is, if we think we have 2% to work with, we work within 2%. If we found out that we have more, or we have some extraordinary needs that we need to meet, that we can address it then.
Ms. Hardy?
So I think, like the past 3 years, I'm fine with that being our starting point. I will say that for pay, I'll reiterate my request, given that salaries are going to be the biggest driver of this, and given that both schools and general government outline that being their biggest driver, I would just like a lot more information. So I think, similar to last year's, I'd like to know how we are benchmarked against other jurisdictions, what their anticipated pay will be, our attrition data, so are we losing people based on pay, and just similar to the concern I think that Ross had is, you know, we can't pay exorbitant amounts knowing that we're not going to be able to afford it in future years. And so I think that those are all data points I think I want to help inform that decision.
I would just say I generally agree with what's been said around the table, at least so far. So, have anything you wanted to say? Okay. I don't know. Anything else people want to say?
Everyone's got their hands up.
Are we done with that topic? Since I was out of town this weekend, the presentation by UIA was done to the Friday morning meeting and is going to be redone to the EDA tomorrow night. Is it the same presentation, basically?
Yes. The intent is an introduction, kind of essentially the presentation to the Ninth City Council action on the interim agreement. So that's, they're going the rounds to make that same.
Okay, so it's pretty much what we saw before Okay.
What time is the Economic Development Committee?
They start at 7.
7 o'clock up at the high school in the library, I think. The EDC meets on Friday at Friday the 7th at 9 o'clock. And part of the agenda is we're going to hear from a real estate broker about commercial vacancies in town. That's going to be on our agenda. You know, why do we have 8 or 9 empty holes at Federal Realty and some of the other old established strip shopping centers? Becky has been doing some good digging and thinks that we ought to hear this guy in particular. I forget his name, but he's somebody who's worked in the city and is not affiliated directly with any of the properties that we're kind of concerned about. So,
Where's this?
EDC meeting Friday morning, 9 o'clock, up in the cramped little third floor room, whatever it's called. The old new Dogwood.
Oh, that place.
Yeah, it
So,
takes
yeah.
about 6.
Yeah, it'll be standing room only.
Hurry up and finish the City Hall, will you?
I am not going to be here next Monday. Got to travel for work, so just want to put that out there.
Yes.
Yep.
You could call in. We'd be happy to hear from you.
So,
Go ahead.
I just want to go back here again. I really like Mitch-Rosie's idea of just we spend first on people. I thought that was a nice way to describe it somehow. And
People are our first priority, top
people are our
priority.
first priority, but well, that's so the people don't get hit by cars, so the people can be safe.
All right, I see how you're stretching that.
But I just, and then the 2% number itself, my request on that one is just, rather than, 2% seems like such a straight line, given that there's so many unknowns still. So can we word something differently, so it's not 2%, but it is commensurate with revenue growth, or proportional to the growth of revenue as it becomes clearer throughout the process? I don't know.
Well, and I think
exceed organic revenue.
That's,
Right, remains within the limits of.
we can work with that language. Our goal would be to turn language around pretty quickly to get it back to council by email, just so you can see it, so it's not a surprise in the packet on Thursday, but instead
Yeah.
have had a chance to get some input on the language
the
itself.
audience for my remarks apparently has gone, but it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, because that's how we roll, that this would be the year to, look in every nook and cranny and pull all, funds that might be in carryover capacity in some other year into this year's budget to the degree that's possible, so that there's no complications of going to explain to the public that, $500,000 or $600,000 was found somewhere later on by anybody.
I think it's important too, because you look at some of these non-real estate tax graphs, and we've run a surplus for many years. It seems like, at least on expectations, based on some of those. Maybe not across the board. So, if there's a couple coffee cans buried out there with money in them, I think it'd be be a good year to dig those up.
Actually, that was a nice thing about the revenue sharing numbers, that as we talked about it, was if there is money left, if we budget and then we have additional revenue at the end of the year, it would be divided up with that same 60-40 split. And it would be held, it's not just going to be spent right away. We would hold it for the schools in an account, so that when we get to a difficult year, it's there to cover some of the.
Up to a cap.
Right.
We
up
had
to a
talked about
cap.
capping, so it
Yeah.
doesn't.
So that was a nice
expand
way to
in
think about it, because
perpetuity.
we always end up with more money than we think we have in May, once we're done the budget, right? We find additional money, and then we could have used that money. So those are just the things that aren't fully in place. Even when we vote, they're not fully in place.
I do think we need to give guidance, though. I mean, I guess what I would say is that I don't have an issue with spending whatever organic growth is, but I don't think it should be so nebulous people don't know what the hell we're talking about. And so I don't know whether it should say, organic revenue growth currently estimated to be 2% or whatever it might be, but something where the guidance is not so vague that you don't even know if there's a number at this point.
I agree, there has to be at least a
Yeah.
We could just cop POTUS 41. I'm going to hang the flag at half-mast on Wednesday. And what did he say? Read my lips.
Let's not use that as
Yeah,
an
let's-
example.
yeah.
So we're not closing Wednesday, right? Even though the feds are. Okay. Just
I
that
heard from the
message-
treasurer that we might
message-
accept tax payments on the day after because the federal government and USPS is closed.
Yeah.
Well, that would be, yeah, so we'll follow up with the treasurer to make sure that if there's a public communication that needs to be made,
Yeah.
we'll do that. But we did have a thread going around with the jurisdictions just when that announcement was made, whether any of the state government or local offices would be closed. And this is a federal holiday, which is appropriate for the president. And but the local jurisdictions will be flying the flag at half-mast and paying its respects, but not closed.
Okay. And economic news of interest to everybody. Did everybody get the email about the Founders Row land deal closing? Okay, so you all got that. I was on the road when
This is
I
where you wear a green tie?
I will be, point me to the event. Just let me know when it is. Don't schedule it when I'm out of town, because that's an event. And the bulldozer is definitely an event.
All right, anything else to be spoken about tonight?
Mayor, move that we adjourn.
All right, let's do it. Thank you.